now I'm doing a big lecture course at Yale on theory after 68. So, yes, no, I'm not as a teacher, but as a scholar, it's different. You have to have done primary research.
Of course.
I did primary research when I did work on James Sterling, when I did the exhibition that went all around the world. So that was, for me, that was a scholarly piece, that was a scholarly book. But I don't try to compete with people who, most of my PhD students now are doing work, and most of Beatrice's and so on, they're all doing work in the 50s and 60s, and doing real work, scholarly work.
Yes.
So I don't pretend to, I can summarize that work, but it's not my work.
Of course.
So I don't always publish, or sometimes I'll give obviously lectures like that. But that was a result of a course I gave at Brown University on contested space. And so I did a whole series of that was after the beginning of the Occupy movement, and the whole sense of space that was appropriated for particular demonstrations. So it was the Occupy. It was Istanbul. It was Tahrir, and so on.
How do you define contested space? Because
space
somehow
that
it is related to Terran Vague.
Yeah, for me, contested space, I'm an old Marxist, right? So contested space is space that ought to be ours.
Okay.
It ought to be the public's, that ought to be part of the societies, and is taken over and adopted and incorporated into the private, either corporate or financial realm. And it's contested at the moment when it's reoccupied.
Okay.
And or implicitly by, from Das Kapital on, implicitly all space that is privatized is, for me, a contested.
Privatized?
Yeah,
oh,
private
okay.
space for me is
contested.
to me contested in relationship to its spaces. I'm in Lefebvre, I believe this, but we have a right to the space that we occupy, that society occupies.
And in relation to this, how does Terran Vague come?
I don't know.
Terran Vague is desolate.
I don't know the piece.
Yes, desolate space, for instance.
But who owns that desolate space?
No one. So
that's not true.
Yes.
There's always a ground rent.
So Ignacio does not really discuss who owns the space.
No, he's not a Marxist.
No, he discusses more. Well, first he talks about it from an artistic point of view and a photography point of view. He discusses Terran Vague being spaces that are out of the productive system of the city, but still within the city. So he explicitly
like
almost...
the zone or the banlieue.
Exactly, yes. And not necessarily being at the periphery, could be also inside. So, for example, the Berlin Wall has created Terran Vague within the city of Berlin.
But every piece of that is owned. It was owned before it was a wall.
Yes.
It was owned before it was a strip.
He does not discuss that, but that is interesting.
Which is why, for example, when cities burn down or when earthquakes happen, nothing happens. It all goes back to its original path. Like when the London fire of 1666, Wren and all the others, Christopher Wren planned a new London, and it all became the same because everybody owns that plot. After the Blitz in London, after the bombing of 41, 42, everybody hoped that this would lead to a new London. It all went back. Right? After 2001, where everybody hoped that it would lead to a new downtown,
cries out,
and it all went back to
hope,
Silverstein and his architect. Yes. And no matter what Libeskind could do, SOM had the commission before the bombing, and it kept the commission afterwards.
Yes. Ignacio, in relation, the text calls for hope, and I'm looking at it now as if it's a text between being a tale or a manifesto, but it's so subtly written as it's a manifesto, but it never claims to be one
Yeah,
at
well,
any
that's
point.
Ignazi. He's wonderful.
Yes, and no one ever mentioned that it's a manifesto, but it's evidently in the underground.
There was a whole period where he was talking about background and weak space or weak monumentality, right?
Yes.
Where he takes it from Heidegger, but he doesn't become Heideggerian. It's so beautiful.
Yes, Terenweg, he does almost the same. He plays on the undernote of a manifesto, but actually that was also a question of mine because he did I think it was a conference as well about
Columbia.
yes, about
On
manifesto.
manifestos, yeah.
Yes.
That just got published, actually.
Ah yes.
Yeah,
Oh okay.
I got the book last week.
Oh okay, great. So maybe I can read more about that because I was wondering. So the text came out in 1994, and then 1995, and then 1996, and I was wondering during that period the whole discourse on what is a manifesto and how is a manifesto. I'm not so well.
Well,
grounded, so-
my premise of that lecture, my premise of the piece, is that the big age of manifestos was, 1909 from the Futurist Manifesto to, Version Architecture was a kind of manifesto, but it was also a treatise. It was a kind of hybrid of a treatise with a manifesto.
Okay.
Slipped through. And then there was a resurgence of that in the 60s. That
In the
somehow there was
60s.
a new voice to manifestos. The generation after the war that didn't want to continue like the old generation.
That
So
was in your lecture.
I think so.
Yes, it was.
And so then you had a little bit of a manifesto with Team 10, but they wanted to be modern too, so that was a little bit of a music manifesto. But then you've got, the archograms, the super studios, the architecture, the super architecture. And at a certain point, that, in a sense, that somehow came to a close because that led to no architecture. In a sense, that the manifestos there were against architecture as practiced, right?
Terenweg
Against the
goes in
discipline,
this direction
right?
a bit, but in the 90s.
Yeah.
So
And then entering into architectural discourse on the back of this critique of architecture were all the French theorists who were not architectural theorists, but were outside architecture. Lefebvre, Foucault, Barthes, Derrida, and so on. All of whom were operating as disassemblers of traditional ideologies, breaking apart the ideology of law, of science, of the ideologies of religion, the ideologies of philosophy, right? So they were all in their way taking apart these ideologies, and in architecture we took on these theories as ways to continue to take apart the operations of architecture. But that actually led to no architecture.
that also led
That
to?
particular deconstruction, there's no, if you read any of the theoretical propositions that come out of deconstruction, that come out of Foucault, they're all against architecture, but
Yes.
they don't propose
Anything.
another architecture. They
Yes.
don't propose another, because they're anti-discipline.
Yes.
Right? So there's nothing there, right? So
And
there's
that's which decade
what?
already?
I would say, starting in the mid '60s in France, peak in France, very high in '68 and after, through to Deleuze in the early '70s, and then the translation effect in the Anglo world in the late '70s, '80s,
Okay.
right? Which is
All
you
right.
have the young critics also who come from outside architecture, like Stanford Quinter, Catherine Ingraham, all these people who are themselves trained in literature in deconstruction come into architecture as experts in deconstruction, right? There are
Yes.
experts, right?
Yes.
You have theoreticians in Paris like Bruno Fortier who worked with Foucault. You have Bob Evans in London who picks up on Foucault in relation to the prisons, but none of them, right, are for architecture, right? They're all potentially apart,
Yes.
right? Either in terms of feminism, in terms of post-colonialism, in terms of all with issues, right? Feminism, post-colonialism, anti-capitalism, whatever, right? There's a whole range of theories that come out about architecture, but not architectural theory.
Okay.
So that led somehow to a kind of gap. I don't think there's been.
So that's already 80s, and then what happened
But
in
then
the
I think
90s?
what happened is that architecture took over as a practice without a theory.
Okay.
I mean, I don't see. I mean,
That's why you think architecture gave up on theory?
Yes.
Okay.
It gave up on theory because it wanted to practice, and it didn't know. I mean, the only theoretical, the only architects who built and practiced still with a foot back into a kind of polemical avant-garde, right? Ashumi and Rem, and of course Peter, right? But they come from a slightly older generation. They're still trying to deal with Corbusier and Mies, right?
Yes.
Rem is still playing.
Yeah, it shows in
with
the last.
everything. I mean, it shows from the Kunsthalle to the present. They just cannot get over Corbusier and Mies. And Peter's the same.
Because for me, at least, Corbusier is the last moment where I really see tangible relation between theory and practice. It seems to me as well to be really the point where it's so explicitly there.
Right, where practice becomes theoretical.
Yes.
I think it was always in Corbusier,
Yes.
depending on his theory at the moment.
Yes, yes. But after Corbusier, it's hard to, well, not directly after Corbusier, but after modernism, the strong link is not so evident.
That's right.
And then, obviously, if you want to keep the link, if you don't have another example afterwards, then
Right.
might as well stay with what you can get. Right?
But then I think, basically, the writers in architecture, in a certain kind of way, I think of myself and Ignazi and all these historians as people who, by implication, because of their historical understanding, will point to a possible theoretical outcome. But that's why it's not a manifesto.
That's why it's not a manifesto.
That's why Terrain Vague is
Yes.
not a manifesto.
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
everything I write may be a manifesto.
Yes.
So
There is the same voice in your lecture on Liebeswurz in the memorial and Ignatius
is that right? Yeah.
Teravagas. Like underlying notes of,
Yes.
of resistance.
The polemic of resistance.
and-
Yeah.
Yes. Because in his text also he ends up on a note where he says the role of architect is problematic because the architects always try to control and to impose and to have a say.
But because that's the problem with us. And I had just 2 days with another very close friend, Stanley von Most, who is also someone who, as a historian, will imply certain things about architecture. Will try to open questions up that have been closed off by polemic. But again, it's not going to write manifestos.
Yes.
So we're all weak theorists, or in the sense of Ignazi, background theorists.
Yes. 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 You do what you can do, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Banham was the same. Banham, well, he wasn't an architect, but he was someone who was passionately interested in loved architecture, but at the same time, his particular concerns always weren't actually polemical, and even the New Brutalism essay is an essay, not a manifesto. Sometimes it's a kind of historical summing up of what might be something that's a new tendency, right? So he's still acting as a historian, as an aesthetician, as someone who's trying to bring the world together in some coherent way. And I think actually Ignazi and I always took Banham as a
Reference.
really serious reference.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. He was the
All right.
the person that everybody read.
Okay. I should go back
If
to
they
Banham
want to be
then.
both historian and critic and theorist.
Any other influences on Ignacy that you can think
Well, the
of?
Spanish influences I don't know very well.
There aren't much.
But there were
They were
strong
before,
Italian
but afterwards.
influences. I mean, both Ignazi and we were both very kind of formed when we met Manfredo. But he was very important to all of us.
Yes.
He was, again, a close friend, and he would invite me to Venice to lecture every year that he was alive. With semi-students, and so I know Venice very well. He was very important to us because he acted as a kind of. We didn't agree. Neither Ignazi or I agreed absolutely with Tafuri in his rigorous separation of history from practice or history from theory, because we didn't think that he did it either.
Okay.
We also thought that he was
Yes.
very instrumental
Okay.
as a theorist, as a historian. His history was very particular.
Yes.
So, but that was very important, and and for Ignazi and myself, the entire, another close friend who died was Aldo Rossi, and so there was a very strong relationship between us and the Italian tendenza
Okay.
of the 60s.
Yes.
From 65, from l'architettura della città and the Milan Triennale of
Triennale.
73.
73. Okay.
And we were all a little bit wary and standing against the Biennale of 80 with the Portuguese.
I don't know much about this.
No more. That's the big Biennale in Venice, which has the Strada Novissima and the whole
Yes,
postmodern
okay.
craziness.
Yes. Yes. Okay, now, yeah.
Which is Paolo Portughese's.
Yes.
And that was very powerful as a counter, as a influence which we resisted.
Yes. I spoke with Jose Luis Mateo, and he discusses how Ignacy is part of this resistance against
Yes.
that wave.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we had a strong interest in typology, in typology, in the whole notion of the city as a continuous artifact. This is where both, where people like myself and Ignazi we all had we had that kind of very early foundation in the theoretical questions I was talking about, because we read Tristopic and Anthropologie Structuraliste when they came out in French, right? So we were that was parallel with what Manfredo was doing. We were all in Europe reading the new criticism. First essays of Derrida came out in '65. And I was involving myself in the analysis of texts in a certain Zeridian way as early as '65. Right?
Okay.
With Foucault, I went to his lectures in Paris, and so there were. I was only 12 years old then.
Okay.
But it sounds very old, but for me it's still very fresh. That in fact we were, in a sense, the first wave of receiving into architecture criticism, but not in a sense trying not to dismember architecture in a way that came later.
We were trying not to do so.
Right. Trying not to take apart the whole discipline.
Okay.
Just to give the discipline a sense of awareness and self-consciousness, but not to break it apart.
Okay. So you were not
mean,
happy when
Well, I
they
think, but
started
my
breaking it?
contemporaries who are Shumi and Rem are like that. They love architecture.
Yes.
They don't want to deconstruct architecture. They want to make architecture
Yes.
in a way that works.
Yes.
So that's not quite the same as a lot of the critics of the 80s.
Do you think also Sola Morales was in this?
I think we
Belief.
all had a tremendous... Yes, absolutely.
And I
When
heard
was Ignacy born? I never quite knew how old he was.
born. Oh. I don't remember.
Now, as a PhD student, you have to know your dates.
Yes, yes. I mean, I have them written everywhere, but
Google it.
no, I have it.
Okay.
It's just I need
Okay,
to
well,
go through.
okay.
I'll send you an email with the date.
Because I know I know that Stanley von Moos and I are exactly... I mean, he was born in 40... I was born in 41.
Same.
Nazi's probably younger.
Yes, younger, 50s plus. I'm gonna say 56, but I'm not sure, so
Yeah,
I
quite
prefer to.
He died very young.
He died very young. Otherwise, I would be asking him the questions now.
Right, absolutely.
Yes, unfortunately. I talked with his son who did his PhD in Harvard,
Yes,
Pao,
yeah.
and yes. He also advised me to talk to you if possible, so I'm very happy to meet you actually.
I wrote a memorial to him, which I think became an introduction to one of the
Inscripciones.
Gili. Yes,
Yes.
Inscripciones.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I read it.
It was a long time ago.
Inscripciones. And you also wrote...
Spent my life writing memorials. It's terrible.
Sorry.
No, it's
I want
okay.
to remind you of this. Yeah. You wrote about Ignacy that he was interested. Yeah, whenever you have to go, just.
Well, I actually, in about 20 minutes or so, I have to go and
Okay.
write a lecture for
Okay,
tonight.
of course, of course. So thank you for your time. It was really great to meet you. You wrote about Ignacy that he was more interested in intellectual stimulus rather than theory. I don't know if you remember that, or you said it. I don't know if you said it or wrote it, but do you recall what you mean by that?
Well, I think it's what I've been saying, that we're very attuned to the culture of our moment. And we're interested in using that to understand the kind of interlocking relations among different cultural
Okay,
practices.
so it's a time issue.
But it's not like a theoretical statement about, it's
Yes.
not like Zumtor coming out and saying,
Yes, yes. Okay.
that's not theory either.
But it goes in different direction, I understand. Okay. And now it makes sense more if it's a time issue. It makes sense to me if it were like a temporal matter, because he's more interested in contemporary. Yeah, that's why Tenavag makes sense as a synthesis
absolutely.
rather than a theory of a
Right,
discourse.
it's like when I wrote Third Typology, it was because everybody was talking about type, and I did a historical essay on type, and then I wrote a little
Yes.
essay which somehow tried to summarize different ideas of type in the different ages, and ended up talking about Ross's idea. It's I wouldn't do that now because nobody's talking about typology except historically. So.
Yes. Also, Ignacy at some point stopped talking about this.
Yeah, well, we all did.
Moved to more
It became,
Tenavag-related issues.
at certain moments, architects' positions which have a certain kind of theoretical resonance become, if they're repeated too often, academic, and the architecture becomes academic as well. And I think that people begin to copy themselves as architects.
Okay.
very, very, I mean, vary, for example. After Bilbao, it's just a repetition of the same,
Yes.
but different, right?
Yes. I think Zaha Hadid as well.
Huh?
Zaha Hadid is also accused of the same thing.
Yeah, well,
Many actually.
yeah, almost all of them. Wolf pricks, all my friends. Just, well, because that's marketing. That's what they do one
When you deal with
brilliant
clients.
building. Yeah, they do one brilliant building, and the clients want that. And then they brand, and then it becomes a branding sign, right?
Yes.
I mean, Rem's fallen into this, and so has.
Ram's lectures are so contradictory with this.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
well he's perverse. He's a journalist, filmmaker at heart, and
Yes.
he really is.
Yes, it shows in his
He's like
buildings.
Michael Moore going after subprime
Yes.
investments and so on. He wants to dig, right? But of course, as an architect, he has to keep that separate because
Yeah.
his architect doesn't. The nice thing about Rem is his architecture doesn't illustrate his theory.
The nice thing.
Yeah, because illustration is like cartoon. It's caricature.
Yes.
I mean, Michael Graves' architecture, to a certain extent, after his mother's house, Venturi's architecture illustrated his theory, right? It
Yes.
became pop, right?
Yes.
So when I say illustrate, I mean not embody, but
Illustrate.
literally,
Yes.
pictorially illustrate.
Yes, yes.
Right? And I think Zaha is illustrating her own idea, or Patrick Shoemaker's idea, or whatever it is. So I think
I think
a lot
for
of
Zaha,
architects-
she's illustrating her theory through her.
what?
Still.
Well, there's very little theory with Zaha.
It seems the other way
her
around.
theory is her theory comes from her illustrations. Yes.
Exactly, that's what I mean. I like. Somehow I like
question.
it, but
No, but she's very much an architect in a sense. I mean,
Yes.
this is not against architecture. This is for, when you talk about theory, theory is something that, I always tell my students, there's nothing called theory in architecture that isn't simply thinking about architecture, thinking architecture through, and or thinking as you make architecture. I mean,
Yes.
Jim Sterling didn't have a theory,
yes,
but his theoretical position is very evident as he moves through design. He presents his idea
Yes.
through design.
yes,
He doesn't have to write it.
yes.
So I find this actually better than. There's a little book now by Balcom. Have you read that? Where a critique of Grassi and Rossi.
Oh,
It's very nice. It's just a little book by this little firm that are a group of students of Grassi who have
where are
reacted.
they?
It's a tiny little book.
no,
It's
no.
just,
The company, the
I think
firm.
Italy.
In
But
Italy?
it's translated into English.
Okay.
now.
I speak Italian, so.
Yeah. Well, it's just published. I got it at. Where did I buy it the other day at Hochpater,
Okay. Yes.
the bookshop. And it's a little red book, and it's two essays, one on Grassi, one on Rossi, and it's basically a younger generation saying, look, we really appreciate what you've done, but what you did was very exciting and absolutely of the moment, but then you yourselves followed your own theory to the point of ossifying, crystallizing, fixing, and academicizing it.
Okay.
So we want to reread your work to see where that went wrong.
Okay.
Very nice book.
Thank you for the summary. It's good.
Well, I read it last night.
All right. I'll read it. Seems interesting. Going back a bit to Pau. Pau said something about Ignacy that it seems to him that he shifted from more German-related influences to more French-related influences. Could you elaborate on that? Mostly philosophy-related influences.
Well, we all did. I mean, the big monsters. I mean, it's like the big monsters in our area in architecture were Corp, Mies, and Alto, right? So the big monsters in philosophy are Kant, Hegel, and Nietzsche. Right? They're German, and
Yes.
they have to be.
What about Heidegger?
What?
Heidegger?
Yeah. But the problem with Heidegger for us was always the Nazi question, and so we had to receive Heidegger through the French.
Okay.